Okay, another question which is asked by another colleague in the group is how many eNodeBs can be served by a single SGW in a live network, and how many SGWs are connected to a single PGW? Great question. And before we look into the diagram and understand, let's again talk about the architecture, and then we can dig further and see what should be the answer and what actually the answer is, and so on and so forth. So let's say these are different eNodeBs, so on and so forth. And then also let's say this is the core network here on top, and then the question can be asked in a way, or it's being asked, this is, let's say, SGW, this is another SGW, we have another SGW, and the question is asking, so how many eNodeBs can be connected to an SGW, let's say if we are doing something like this, right? And similarly we can have, for redundancy purposes, we can have another diagram over here, and what I'm going to do is, let's say this is for redundancy purposes. Okay, so what I have done is the first two SGWs which are in pool together, I have added those SGWs are connected to these three eNodeBs, let's call them ABC, and then the other SGW, which we call it as 2, is also connected to the same eNodeBs. Now this is one way you can do pooling of SGWs for these eNodeBs. When it comes to asking question how many eNodeBs are connected to an SGW in a live network, there is no exact answer because it depends on the operator eventually. And in case of deployment, let's take an example of a small network. What practitioners from the field, when it comes to core network deployment, they say ideally yes, it should be as much possible as equal to the number of eNodeBs we have in the network, meaning for a small network, depending on how many eNodeBs you have, you can have similar number of SGWs as well. And then based on that particular context, now not many operators can afford to do that, so what they can do is they can have SGWs pooled together, and then that's how they can use it as well. So there is no exact answer. However, you can have more than one eNodeB connecting to the same SGW. So not the exact cookie cutter answer for this. So the real answer you could say is yes, it depends on the deployment. For small network, you can have as many SGW as compared to the number of eNodeBs. Then the next question which they can follow up is, okay, how many PGWs are there for SGWs, meaning how many SGWs a PGW can have, or how many PGWs do we need to have in a network? So the simple answer in the network is, for a small network, simple answer for a small network is, well, for a small network you can have one PGW. So if I draw this in this scenario, you can say, let's say this is one PGW, and that PGW is connected to all these SGWs. Okay, and then for geo redundancy purposes, you can have another PGW as well for redundancy purposes. For small network, that's what is recommended. As long as your PGW will not change, the IP address of the UE will not change. Now for bigger networks, it always depends on how much of honey an operator wants to put in. If they can afford, they have a lot more traffic and they have users, different market, they can have more PGWs as well. But you don't need to have specifically for a small network more PGWs. Now when it comes, it also depends on the capacity as well ultimately, because connection to these SGWs and PGWs, it basically is an IP connection to an IP network. There is a GTP tunnel which is set up from the eNodeB towards PGW and SGW, and their location can be anywhere because ultimately it will be an IP connection there. So their location do not specifically matter. So depending on if you have really big network, then in that case you will worry about locations of these PGWs and then the SGWs as well. For small network, that's what you see specifically. Now depending on the vendor you are having, if you have a vendor which has, depending on the capacity of their PGW, SGW, then you can decide, okay, this much capacity we want, and these are the number of eNodeBs we have. So maybe it makes sense to have more than one PGW or more than 3 or 4 PGWs depending on the size of the network. So as an example, having said all that, as an example, let's take a look at this picture once again. In this picture, what you observe is, if you observe closely, you will see there is one PGW here, and then there are different SGWs, and you see them depending on the number of eNodeBs, there are similar number of SGWs as well, almost. So we have, let's say, 5 eNodeBs and there are 4 SGWs in one pool. Similarly, there are almost same number of SGWs as number of eNodeBs, but then there are not many additional PGWs. So again, as I said, it depends on the size of the network, but more generally it is appreciated, it is recommended to have almost the same number of SGWs as compared to PGWs. Now, one question which can be follow up as well, in case if you are configuring both SGW and PGW within the same box, and that's an internal network, or that's the network by the operator for all on its own, they are not doing any roaming or sharing the network with anyone else, then in that case you will have a same number for your SGW, because you're configuring the same scenario, and you are not really going to change anything in that case. Okay, so that was the answer to this particular specific question.